Hello, and welcome to Partners Beyond Parenthood, the podcast that helps new parents thrive without losing themselves. My name is Saba Bazuner, and in today's episode, we have a very special guest. Her name is Lindsay Cavanagh. I hope I said that right. Really excited to have you on the show. I have followed your podcast. I've read quite a lot of what you share on marriage after kids, and I'm so excited for what you can actually share with the listeners on my podcast today.
Yay, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm so excited to be here. I think that podcasts like this are just so important, and I just love that you're talking about this stuff. But hi, I am Dr. Lindsay Cavanagh. I am a psychologist and marriage expert, and I am passionate about helping busy parents have strong marriages, because when it comes to how happy and healthy you are, your relationship is the number one predictor to that. And so everything that busy parents need is like solid support. And so that's what I try to make sure everybody has.
Absolutely. And I do apologize. I missed the doctor title in there. So
no, it's all right.
Good one to note that. Thanks for adding that. No, it is very important. It shows a lot of what you can do.
I spent a long time getting that.
Absolutely. So my bad for not adding that in there.
Okay.
But no, so I've seen that you've made a bit of a transition. I don't know if that's what you'd call it or if you offer both, but I know in the past you used to offer primarily services to military spouses, and now you've also either rebranded, I'm not entirely sure, please enlighten me, or you have two offers, which is also married after kids. I'd love to hear about that transition and how that came about.
So yes, I originally started as married to military. I am a military spouse. My spouse has been in for almost 19 years, and we've just been living the military life. And there are so many challenges that the military presents that makes marriage even more difficult than it can already be. And then I also had kind of noticed, though, that I am in the middle of my third deployment in 2 years, and I just really needed some parts of my life to not revolve around the military. And so I expanded, I pivoted to married after kids, where I really focus on kind of all parents. That being said, like, I still have a soft spot for military. I still work with a lot of military couples, but now we've just sort of brought more people into the fold. And again, how many more marriages? If I really think about the two things that impact marriage the most, I would say kids and then also the military. So those are kind of my two areas of expertise.
Right. I mean, I can definitely agree with both. And one thing I'd like to ask or perhaps clarify is, when you think of the military aspect, or at least from what I would perceive it to be, why is it specific to military? Is it because you have bouts of solo parenting a lot? Is it just, the load really falls on you because of deployments? What is the reason behind that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I think one of the biggest things that comes up with the military is you have almost zero control over anything. My spouse left for a deployment 6 weeks into the birth of our second child and was gone for 6 months, and I had to move to Japan by myself with the two girls. And it's like those kinds of situations, right? Never in my 6 months postpartum when I say let's move overseas.
Right.
So I think it's a lot of kind of lack of control. And then I think that the fact that they can't be around, I think one of the things that I hear parents talk about the most is not feeling supported by their spouse. And I think that it's one thing to not feel supported when your spouse, is around and potentially can do things, and it's another thing to not feel supported when they actually are not around and everything really does fall, and they're both their own unique like set of hard. So I think that there's also a lot of overlap. I think that there can be a lot of loneliness. I think that there's a lot of loneliness in parenting, and so I think you just sort of add those things together and it kind of exponentially feels hard, or it can. And I think that they just require a lot of tools to manage both things. And so if you don't have those, I think that you can feel really lost in again, both circumstances.
Right. First of all, that's crazy having to move with not just one, but two kids, especially when it's 6 weeks. So
I don't recommend it. It really was not a great thing.
and by yourself, I can't imagine. And that's a long, I don't know where you went from, but that I imagine is already a very long
We left
trip.
from Colorado to Japan. Again, I never would choose to do that, and so like I get to see like really how strong that I am. Like I know
Right.
that I can carry, and I know that I can manage a lot, and that doesn't always mean that I want to. That doesn't always mean that it's what is best for me. And so I think that there's always this constant balance between the military sometimes forces me into situations, but I would say parenting does this too. Parenting can sometimes force us into situations that are less than ideal for us. Like maybe it's something that triggers us. It's maybe something that, doesn't feel good. I was sitting at the park the other day and I was sitting there. I'm like, I hate the park. Like I genuinely don't enjoy going to the park. My girls love going to the park. So of course I'm going to take them. But like I personally don't love it. And so I think that there are just these situations that maybe aren't necessarily what's best for us. And there's always like that balance between, how do I take care of myself in these situations that, maybe I wouldn't choose on my own.
Right. And that's, I think, a question that I've been really dying to ask you is how do you maintain your identity or build an identity in those circumstances where you are taking a lot of the load? You're doing parenthood almost by yourself a lot of the time. Again, not like you said, because they're not doing it, but rather because they're actually not physically there to help out. But how do you then manage time for yourself to be yourself?
I think it's something that has to be very intentional. Like it has to be something that every day I'm asking myself, like, who am I? What do I need? Because I think that there are so many other things that will pull my attention, energy, you name it, right? I have a 6-year-old now and a 2-year-old. And so they're still very little. They still require a lot from me. So I'm getting them up, I'm getting them dressed, I'm making breakfast, I'm getting them out the door. I'm doing all of this stuff. And it's really easy just for me to go an entire day and not think about myself. So I really schedule very intentional time. I even have a reminder in my phone that comes up every single morning that asks myself, like, how do you want to feel today? Because it's so easy for us as humans to get lost. I think our needs greatly change after we have kids. Like what we need, what makes us feel good, how we recharge, like all of that can change drastically. And if we're not really sitting back and thinking about like, who am I now? Who do I want to be now? What makes me feel good now? I think that, it just cannot happen. And not because we don't want it to, but more just because there's so many other things around that, again, it's like the shiny object where
Right.
it's easy for us to get lost.
Right. And when you get that prompt, I'm very curious. I love the fact that you have that. Do you actually take that moment? Or can you take that moment? Because often there's a lot of things going on, like how do you make sure that you actually take that time to address how you want to feel that day?
So I do it in the morning because I am an early riser. That is the time that I thrive. So I specifically do it then, and I set it for a time that I know that the kids will still be asleep and that I will be able to, have some thought behind it. The other thing is I know it has to be something that I can do in less than 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. Or, and so I will think to myself, even if now the kids wake up early or whatever, that is still something. So how do I want to feel today? I want to feel accomplished. Okay, what do I need to do to make that happen today? I need to tackle my to-do list. I need to, get XYZ thing done that I've been working on. I need to make a connection with somebody. I need to, take care of my clients really well today. Like what is it that's going to do that? And then now I'm thinking about that throughout the day, because maybe what I want to feel is relaxed. And so I need to put down the to-do list and, lay down for an hour or something. Again, I think that has to be an intentional thing, because if I'm not, I'm just powering through. I'm doing the to-do list.
Mm-hmm. And this, I feel, can help me a little bit into the next question, which is, this is one thing that you do for yourself. What are the reasons that most people come to you to work with you on their marriage?
I would say that there's a couple of things. I think that it's either one, people feel like they can't resolve. So whether that's like communication, but they can't resolve things. Like they fight and nothing is actually getting better. So they feel like they're having just the same fights all the time. They're exhausted. They don't want to do it anymore. They feel very misunderstood by each other, that kind of thing. Or really, I should say, you just don't really feel connected anymore. You don't feel loved. You don't feel valued. You don't feel that your spouse really cares to know you and help you and all of those things. And so you tend to get to this really hopeless place that like I don't know how to change this, and yet I feel so unhappy in it. And that makes parenting harder. It makes kind of managing that giant to-do list harder. It makes, like, if you are working outside the home, harder. It makes just everything more challenging. And so I think that's usually when people are coming in, is like, I need this to feel better.
Right. So it sounds like communication is often one of the biggest things, right? Like there's a breakdown 100%. In communication. Every relationship is unique. I imagine you must also do a lot of personalized work. But in terms of actual communication, is there one or two strategies that you generally find yourself repeating often to clients?
Yes. So the first thing is, after you have kids, the amount of mental load, tasks, whatever you want to define it as, exponentially increases. There are so many things that now have to occur for an entire household to run, right? And that includes the kids within it, right? So it's the everyday stuff, like making meals, and then it's also this needs to go to the doctor at this time. So it's all of that. And all of that needs to happen. And so what I find is that couples, before they have kids, they don't really think about how they manage those things. They don't really have the conversations, and you can get away with not having them because, there's not as much stuff. And I find with kids, because of that exponential increase, it's really easy to have an unbalance in kind of who is managing the household, and that really is what leads to a lot of the miscommunications, right? Because if I'm not feeling supported, it's really easy for my brain to say it's because he doesn't care. It's because he doesn't want to. Now, I find that very rarely that's the case, but that's how people, feel. And now we start acting, if I feel like my spouse doesn't care, now I'm defensive, I'm probably not really showing him love back, and now we can get into this cycle. So my tip in terms of communication is really looking at how are you managing the entire household. Like if you were at a job, this would be like a project manager, right? You have to have that person who's overseeing to make sure that everything's happening. And I think people end up falling into roles. You have the default parent, you have the non-default parent, but are you doing that intentionally, right? Like, are you taking this stuff on because you actually want to, or is it just falling in your plate, and is that something that you need to be actually talking about? So my first kind of communication thing is making sure that all of that is just very explicit, that you're actively talking about it until you have a system that works. The other thing is you also have to very intentionally communicate love every single day, as often as you can, not just on a date night, not just when you're feeling really great, like every single day, regardless of how good you feel, regardless of how angry you are at them, communicating love every single day, multiple times a day, if you can, is even better. But I think, those two things alone will set you up and at least get you feeling like you are a partnership and a team that that feels good. And then you can kind of fill in from there.
Right. No, I mean, those are great tips. So for the communication, I'm very curious. When you and your husband are apart, how do you communicate this love?
Well, one, we have our system for how we communicate, like when he's home. And then we have our system for how we communicate when he's gone. And we are very intentional. We talk about it. We think about it. Like, what do I want when he's gone? Like, what feels good to me? What feels good to him? How do we work those together? So, again, these are all of those, like, conversations. I call them process conversations because you're talking about the how. Like, how are we doing this? But for us, I really like to look at, again, when do I feel most connected? How do I feel most connected? I feel most connected with quality time and words of affirmation, validation. And so we talk a lot about when he's gone, how am I going to feel that quality time when he's not there? His primary love language is physical touch, which again takes a big hit when he's gone, and acts of service. And so what we do is we talk about how those needs are going to be met. So for me, with that quality time, I like when he can send me, I call it like the meaty email, where it's like couple paragraphs that I can read, right? And I can feel like I'm spending time with him. I can also go back and like reread the email. So we're just taking what we know works and figuring out how do we change it up a little bit so now it works when he's gone. So for him, with the physical touch, like I'll talk to him like, I would love to give you a hug right now, or when you come back, I'm gonna give you the biggest smooch or whatever, right? It's never exactly the same as when he's here, but we know and we can interpret that as, right, our love in those moments.
Right. So intentionally preparing, that is absolutely vital. And I think also, like, you've just given a few examples, but actually having those examples to kind of be like, okay, this is what I'd like or what I can expect. That's possibly how I'd feel it. I think that's a really great way of communicating love. And before you'd mentioned the communication, you'd also mentioned the role division. So just to confirm, in terms of communication, do you think it's worthwhile for, let's say, expecting parents to already set those role divisions aside? Obviously, it's never too late, but is that the easiest time to do it?
I say, it's never too early. It's hard to do it before. I didn't know what was going to feel good once I actually became a mom and what was going to be really hard. And so I think that what you can do before you have kids is you can really start to say, here's the chores that I like to do. Here's the ones that I don't like to do. Which ones do you like? Which ones that you don't? So at least you have some ideas. But I think that these are conversations that you just have to have. And I say it's not even just after you have kids. Every stage is different, right? I'm out of like the newborn phase, but I'm still in diapers. Like there's certain things, whereas my oldest now, she has the activities. And so every age or stage has its own unique challenges. And I say that couples really need to be having this conversation at multiple intervals every time sort of those needs and the mental load changes, just to make sure that how it's working, actually fits. I remember I had a mom of 4, and she was in the habit of every day she was getting up and making breakfast for her spouse. And we're talking like eggs, bacon, like really like good breakfast.
Wow, with 4 kids?
Yes. But that was partly the thing, is that we had her kind of come up with what all that she really had on her plate. And it was one of the things where I was like, oh, that's like a really big thing to do when you just said all of these other. She's like, I know, but he's probably going to be so mad. I've been doing it since before we had kids. And we had them talk about it. And he's like, look, I love that breakfast, but like I would way rather you get those 20 extra minutes of sleep. So it was like they had just gotten into this is what we do because we've done it for so long, without actually saying like, is this working for us now? And so they stopped it, and both of them were fine, and they were able to kind of put those resources elsewhere, which, is so important.
The power of habit is crazy, right? What you're used to from before, you drag
Yes.
over into the new one. And I think that becomes so much more pronounced when you have kids, which is, I guess, why you also see so many clients, right? All of that drags over.
Yeah.
So they're now taking care of the kid, but they're still taking care of everything else. And that all of a sudden just becomes like, I don't know, so much.
Too much. Yeah, I agree. And I think that I always say any like triggers or any traumas or any just stuff that's there that, you could maybe brush over or just not deal with when you have kids. It's like a giant spotlight. It just shines right on those things, right? They're just so much more present, and you can't always avoid that stuff anymore. And I talk about how, like, your kids, you naturally will prioritize them. Like, that's just what it's in our DNA. You don't even have to think about it. You just do it. Even things with work, we do that because we're so conditioned, even when we're young and in school. Like, we just do, we do this. Our marriage doesn't have that same requirement, is the word that's coming up, that we have to pour into this. I have to do this. So it's a really easy thing to drop off. It's a really easy thing. I remember talking to a client yesterday who said, like, I just thought we were strong enough, right? Like, I knew I didn't have the energy. I just couldn't do the things for the marriage that I knew to do, but I just figured, what's a couple weeks going to do? But then a couple weeks turns into a couple months, which then turns, right? And so I think no matter how strong your relationship is, if we're not pouring into it, it's like driving a car around without putting gas in. And at some point, it's going to run out. It just can't keep moving.
Right. So you mentioned a word that I find very important in relationships in general, family, at any point: priorities. And I recently spoke to someone about this. It is super hard. Like, I think especially for mothers, you naturally prioritize your kids above everything else. Of course, they also need it, right? So again, I said this before, it really depends on how you define priorities.
Yeah.
But would you say from your experience that it is actually necessary for us to prioritize ourselves?
100%. Like, it's the whole put your oxygen mask on first before you put it on your kids or assist your kids. And it's because, like, if I am passed out on the floor, I can't help them. If I am beyond burnt out, I can't emotionally be there for them. I can't even physically be there for them. I can't give them a good role model. I can't do any of it as well. And so I think that so often people say, I don't have time. I don't have time to take care of myself. And for me, what I find is when you figure out how to fit that in, and I say, like I said, I do that less than 5 minutes, or what are like 30-second snippets that I can give myself throughout the day that literally fuel me through those next moments. When you can figure out how to do that, I think you start to see, oh, I am actually enjoying being a parent more. Oh, I'm actually like feeling better. Oh, I'm more connected to myself. It's really hard to switch, but once you start to feel like how great it is, you feel like you have more time.
And why do you think it is so difficult? I'm not going to say just mothers, but for parents to prioritize themselves?
I think that our society, to be honest, just doesn't teach us to do that. From a young age, you're taught to give to other people. At school, you do what the teacher needs you to do. At work, you do what your boss needs you to do. At home, you do what your kids need to do, right? We're never really taught how to prioritize ourselves. And so when you get to be a parent and you actually need it, which I would say you need it all the time, but I think it's never more important than when you have kids, we don't know how to do it. And now you're trying to figure out how to take care of yourself while you're trying to figure out how to take care of kids. And it's overwhelming. And like, where do I start? I feel like I don't have time to go to the bathroom. How do I, how do I actually do that? And so I think that there's, I don't think it's people's fault. I just think that it's kind of how we have been programmed, and you have to just unlearn a lot of that stuff.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I find it very difficult to do, but I am trying very hard to prioritize myself. Again, like you said, put your oxygen mask on first to be able to help others. Um, so I'd like to ask, in terms of priorities again, when people come to you, I'm guessing that they're starting to prioritize their marriage, right? Or not
Or they
prioritize, but they've
want
realized,
to. I think
right,
I think they've realized that it's not a priority at all.
right. And that's when they want to come
Yeah.
to you because they're like, we need to
Yeah.
work on it.
Yeah.
Is there a certain age that the kids are when you start noticing that people come to you, or is it just very different?
I would say I'll give you kind of what I see and then I'll tell you what I know from the literature.
Okay.
So 95% of people report a decrease in satisfaction in their marriage following the birth of their first child. And that can also increase with subsequent kids. And what that research says too is that it doesn't go back up unless you actively work to change it. So it's not something that just dips down and then naturally like gets better once you get your feet under you. Like it has to be something that couples are intentionally changing. The other statistic that I have for you is that in marriages, they say that when people first recognize they're having issues, until when they reach out to a marriage expert, a counselor, whomever, is the average of 6 years. So
What?
that's 6 years on average. So that's some people are doing it sooner, but some people are doing it way later. And 6 years, that's how old my daughter is right now. And so you are getting these people that have 6 years of resentment, 6 years of pain, 6 years of hurting each other, 6 years of, all of those things that you just dig yourself a hole, and it absolutely gets harder to get out of. And so I find that I get a mix. I get a lot of people kind of in that new, kind of where I am, the toddler stage that will reach out. They're out of the newborn, so it's like I have a little bit more bandwidth to like have conversations, but you're still like really in the weeds. And then I get a lot of like teenage or just getting out of the house where, oh man, I'm realizing that my kids don't really need me as much anymore, and we are completely disconnected. So I would say those are sort of the pockets that I personally tend to see the most, is the young and then the older, the teenage years.
I am mind blown. 95%, first of all, that's
I know. And no one
that's
tells you
every
this. No
marriage,
one tells
right?
you. Like, even I read a lot of books about having a baby, and I took classes about how to, like, give birth and feed
Right.
and all of this stuff. And I'm like, why aren't we talking about this stuff? It was part of the reason why I made the shift to Married After Kids, is because I just felt like it was astronomical how widespread this was, and yet how little is done to combat it, to once you're experiencing it. I experienced it in my own marriage. I have worked with marriages for 16 years, and I have the tools, or I have them at least to teach, and we struggled. I felt unsupported by him after the birth of our first. I felt that we were not on the same page. I even had questions of like, gosh, are we going to survive this? I mean, all of the stuff that people talk about, and I knew what I needed to do. I knew it was normal. And I just think that if you're somebody that doesn't know that that is a thing, and then you don't have the tools to fix it, that can be just the most scary, hopeless place to be when you're
Right.
also trying to care for kids. It's just so much.
Yeah. And do you think that also has a lot of impact of the community around you, of how that impacts your happiness? Because I think what I've heard, or I think I read that somewhere, I can't remember, is that a lot of people that give birth in, let's say, African countries or Latin America, the family is a lot closer. So they have a lot of people that come, and even in Asian cultures, they have family that is there right after the newborn stage that are there to help you. They help you cook. They help you with a lot of different things, or even just holding the baby, right? I think in Western cultures that has been lost a lot Do you think that that contributes to a lot of it? And does that maybe have something to do with the statistic of the 95%?
I do. And I think that part of it is that we are doing, in our kind of Western culture here, we are doing the job of what multiple people used to do. Not only did you have multifamily homes, but even just like where you're around a lot of family that could come. And, you know, like me in Japan, I am doing everything by myself. There's no one. I have a nanny that comes in for, 5 hours, 4 days a week. And I have a babysitter for evening. And even then, that costs money. So I'm not going to be able to use it all the time. And I think that social media adds a whole layer to this, because often you're seeing these very, shiny, perfect looking parents, families, right? And we're sitting here struggling, saying like, what the heck? Why can't I do it? And I always say, you don't know, right? You don't know what happens the other 23 hours and 50 minutes of the day. You don't know what kind of support they have around them. I remember it was a businesswoman, and she said, yes, I am very successful in business as a mom, and I have a full-time nanny, I have a full-time house cleaner, I have a full-time personal assistant, I have a personal shopper. This is why I can do this. And it was like, oh, right?
Exactly,
so I think, yeah, we're just trying to do everything, and it's more than one person's job.
Yeah. Well, social media is a big one, right? Of what we are expected to do, what we expect of ourselves, and not actually knowing the full story, which is often the case with many marriages. You never really know the full story. I saw a post of yours. We also mentioned this briefly, that, like the change in marriage, etc., of how difficult it can become. But I think I saw a post where you schedule intimacy with your partner. Is that a regular part of a date night, or is that literally just you're scheduling time to just to talk, no phones, no screen time, etc.? What does that mean?
Yeah, so we do a couple of things. Number one, we do just dedicated time to check in with each other every single day, even if he's gone, right? If it's over email, like we will dedicate to how are you doing, and again, what can we do to show each other love. We will, once a week, we do a bigger check-in that's like, how did we do this week? How, here's what we did well. Here's what I think we could do better. Here's where I felt the most loved. So we have that we do weekly. And then the other thing, like if we talk about actual intimacy, so the research shows that couples who schedule intimacy tend to not only have more intimacy, but they tend to feel more connected and satisfied. And why is that? Because again, if I'm just waiting for a spontaneous moment to be intimate, it probably isn't going to happen. By the end of the day, I'm exhausted. But if I know that it's coming, I can figure out how to manage my energy levels throughout that day, so that by the time I get there, I can fully show up. But I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't know that it was coming. The other thing that we really know for women in particular is that we need to feel emotionally connected before we can physically connect. And so this is where it gets to be like, if you're helping with me with my mental load that day, if you're like taking some things off my plate that day, like now I have more of a capacity for that at a later point. The other thing about scheduling it is there's a thing about anticipation, right? It's why romance novels are as popular, I guess, as they are, because you just have that like anticipation and that, kind of excitement, like thinking about it. It just helps. It just changes things. So it's that intentional piece. I also have a reminder every day at noon that says, text your spouse. And I just know that is when I send a compliment or something nice. And you think, like, why do you need to remind yourself to do that? Because if I don't, I will forget to say something. Even if I go into the day saying, I'm going to say something nice today, again, it just falls off. It's just not the priority thing unless
Yeah.
you make it a priority.
No, absolutely. And I could really resonate with that post. I think that's one of the biggest differences we had noticed in our relationship after we had kids was just the lack of intimacy. And again, it depends on how people do it, but I slept in a different room with the newborn. He slept in a different room because, that's how we'd agreed to do it. I was like, look, you're still working. And if I need a nap during the day, then you can at least take care of her and I can nap. So that worked for us in terms of me actually trying to catch up on sleep. But that took a really big hit on intimacy. But that said, soon after that, I think about 3 months after we moved, so then we were pretty much forced to be in the same room, which helped on the intimacy level.
Yeah.
But of course, that changed on other fronts.
Yeah.
But one thing I love that you mentioned is that you do weekly meetings. We do that as well. And I think we've been doing that for about 6 months now. And that has had a huge impact. I don't know if that's something that you recommend regularly, but I would absolutely.
Yeah, I do.
Right. But I don't know what the reception is for you. Do people see that as something strange?
I get a lot of spouses of my clients that are resistant to it at first because they think, I don't want to sit down and just have you bash me for 15 minutes or however long it's going to be. I think it's also scary if you don't know how to, okay, so you're telling me that you didn't feel super loved this week. Like if I don't know how to change that, that's also a really kind of helpless feeling too. So I think that there are some valid barriers that people wouldn't want to. That being said, I think that once you start doing it and you realize how good it feels, I find that it gets easier. We don't have to even talk about it anymore. We used to do it every Sunday. Now it just happens. We don't even really do it on just Sundays. It just happens almost when we need it. It still happens about once a week. But we've been doing it for years at this point. So it's something that we will never, I think, give up.
Mm-hmm. No, that's amazing. Well, I have one more question for you. So if a listener right now is considering a divorce, what would you say to them?
I would say that I see you in that hopelessness. I see you in that pain. I see you in thinking about that as a possibility is never something that I know people take lightly. And so I just think that that's a really hard place to be. And what I will say is that if you want to see if there are things that can get better, check with a marriage expert. Check it out with somebody. There are tools to turn things around if that's what you want. And I have seen people that have actually filed for divorce. I've had people that got divorced and then did this, are now married or remarried, I guess. I just think it's never too late. There are the tools. So if you need the hope, let somebody else take the wheel. It's not a failure. We don't celebrate support in the ways that we should. And if divorce is the best decision for you, get support to help you through that too. Because if you are there, the path towards improving your marriage is going to be a hard one. But the path towards getting divorced is also going to be a hard one. And so just make sure that you are getting the support you need because you do not have to go through those hard paths alone.
I think that's really great advice. I think people think that, just filing for divorce is one step and then, your problems are going to be solved. But what comes after that is also very rough. And with that said, I'd love to ask you, what do you currently offer for people that are looking for a consultation?
The easy way to kind of just learn about me specifically is to check out the podcast, Married After Kids. I talk a lot about this stuff. I think now if you are ready to have it be a little bit more personalized to you specifically, I offer a free Married After Kids intervention call where we really talk about what's been going on, what the pain points are, and exactly how I would intervene in order to get the results that you want. And then I offer, one-on-one. I really find that all people are different and all marriages are different. There's never just a one way for everybody. So I still work one-on-one with clients to just really figure out what works best for you.
Well, whatever links I will get from you, I'm definitely going to add to the show notes. I think it's absolutely incredible what you do. Like you said, many people don't realize what they're getting into once they have kids or how their relationship is going to change. And I think the more people can know about it or have more access to services like yours and resources, the happier more people or families will be. So thank you so much for all that you do, for being here today, for sharing all your wisdom. It's been absolutely a pleasure having you on this show. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I just want to say thank you for having this kind of platform to normalize these conversations, to let people know that they're not alone. I just think that podcasts, this podcast specifically is really, really important. So thank you. And thank you for having me be part of it.
Thank you so much for tuning in and sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you've just watched and enjoyed this video, I'd be so grateful for a like and if you'd hit the subscribe button. With your support, I'll be able to invite bigger guests and provide more value. If you're listening to the audio only, make sure to follow this podcast to get tips on parenting and partnership and hear inspiring stories from other parents as well. See you next week.